waiting for us to have a discussion on school boundaries. Unfortunately, we are 90 minutes behind in our schedule. Therefore, chairman has decided to move that to some other time, hopefully sometime in October. So with that, we will start supposedly 3 o'clock work session, topic A, graduation requirements. Let me call on Dr. Presidio for an opening, and that should include what the staff is expecting to get out of this work session so that board members can focus on those.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I'm going to address very specifically what we're looking for, because we do need some guidance from the board on a number of questions. So I'm going to do that on a subsequent slide here in just a second. But first of all, let me thank you for not postponing this work session. It is a very important topic that's very timely. And as many of you know, we had a really hard time scheduling it last year. So this is something we've been trying to schedule for about 6 months now. So thank you. I'm going to attempt to go through the slides relatively quickly. We only have about 20 slides to give the board time for discussion and questions. And I did want to just introduce Jen Glazier, who's our Director of Counseling, College, and Career Readiness, and Noelle Clemenco, who's our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, who are going to help me with the presentation tonight. So before I get into the precise outcomes, I just wanted to remind folks really that in the community that might be watching this work session about why we're having this discussion at all about changes to local graduation requirements. And I did notice on the radio on the way in this morning that there was a story that the board was going to be considering our graduation requirements. So there might be some constituents who might have more questions than normal. And you'll recall that when we created the strategic plan, one of the big areas that we heard from families was the need and the desire to have more opportunity for student choice in their high school experience. And into the strategic plan that the board developed, there's a specific action that you see here that calls on the board to consider recommendations for changes to local graduation requirements. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And graduation requirements themselves actually are quite complicated and are not easy to understand. They involve a lot of state regulations that are often changing and shifting and moving. So for today's presentation, there are 3 different areas that we're going to focus on, and we're going to look at each of them independently and very deliberately. So to Mr. Moon's question, as you see on this slide, the outcomes that we're looking for first are with respect to science and social studies and the requirements for a standard diploma. And we've been working on these recommendations for over a year now. The public was noticed as a new business item on September 13th at the board meeting that we'd be having this work session, and that the board likely would be taking a vote on September 27th. So we're going to be looking at science and social studies requirements with a potential vote for September 27th. Then in previous work sessions on this topic, the board had asked us to consider 2 other areas for course taking flexibility. The first being health and physical education, and the board asked us to look at the possibility of granting PE credit to student athletes. So we'll look at that one separately, and we're going to need some direction from the board on that as well. And then world languages, the board asked us to consider whether we could grant high school credit to 7th grade students for world language level 1 courses. So we'll look at that separately as well. So there's a lot here. We're going to kind of jump in. Just real briefly on the timeline, we had 2 work sessions on this topic in school year 16-17. And last year, we had a steering committee that we formed to try to make sure before the board was asked to take a vote that we had sufficient perspective from school-based staff in terms of the recommendations that we might be making to the board. So following today's presentation, again, the board potentially will consider changes to the science and social studies requirements for a standard diploma on the 27th. And if those were approved, then those changes would go into effect for school year 19-20. I want to pause here for just a second and call everybody's attention to the fact that we're looking at changes to the standard diploma only. So when we talk about the potential changes for science and social studies, we're looking at changes that would only impact students that pursue a standard diploma. So currently in FCPS, only about a third of our students pursue a standard diploma. The majority pursue an advanced studies diploma. And the flexibility that we're going to be talking about in a minute regarding the number of science disciplines and the number of social studies credits that we require in Fairfax, which are stricter and higher than those requirements that the state requires, still would only apply to students pursuing a standard diploma, not an advanced studies diploma. Briefly on the steering committee process, as I said, we had a broad-based steering committee that considered very deeply the potential changes to any of the graduation requirements that are under consideration here today. And I had a couple questions from board members after we posted the slides that I just wanted to speak to. And the first involved teachers in the process, wanting to know about how teachers were involved in the process. So on the slide, you'll see that department chairs really were the main conduit. Department chairs, of course, are teachers, and the department chairs on the steering committee collected information from those teachers in their schools, and principals that were on the committee and assistant principals, DSSs, did so as well. The other question was around the involvement of parents and students in this process. And parents and students were not members of the steering committee because what we're considering here are how we choose to implement state requirements within FCPS. We're not considering whether to offer new courses. We're not considering what courses students may choose to take. We're considering how to implement state regulations. And any of the changes that we talk about here would not, even if a student chose the flexibility, if one student chose to accept the flexibility, they wouldn't be precluded, or another student wouldn't be precluded from taking courses if we created greater flexibility. And we'll get into explaining what that looks like in each of those three different areas that I described. So we're gonna jump in and start by considering the science and social studies recommendations that the steering committee and that the leadership team have put together. And we're gonna start with science, and I'm gonna actually turn the presentation over to Jen, who in her role as Director of Counseling understands all of the intricacies of graduation requirements and can explain the nuance probably better than I can on some of these.
Okay, so we will address both science and social studies independently. As a reminder, they are the two that are combined for board action being required if we are going to make any changes. The first area that we will cover is science. For science, the question that we explored is, should FCPS change local graduation requirements to match the number of disciplines required by VDOE for the standard diploma? On this slide, you'll see that the FCPS standard diploma currently requires 3 credits in 3 different disciplines, while the VDOE requirement for the standard diploma is also 3 credits. However, that's only from 2 different disciplines. There are 4 possible disciplines available: biology, chemistry, earth science, and physics. To give you an idea of some of the courses that count for each of the disciplines, this next slide, slide 12, shows a breakdown of, if you will, the core classes in each of those disciplines. This does not include all of our elective science courses. It does include our core content science courses for each of the disciplines. What you may notice is that for the first time, VDOE has introduced an environmental science option. This option is available to any 9th grade student and is currently being piloted for the first time at a small group of our high schools. This has been introduced as a course that may count towards a biology or an earth science discipline for a student. With this addition of environmental science for students, it creates more flexibility for students to choose in 9th grade whether or not to start with biology or to start with environmental science. Additionally, it's important to know that we've created another possible avenue for students in 9th grade to build a year before biology, with active physics also potentially being a course option for those students who have the targeted literacy and numeracy needs. So we anticipate a very small group of students will take active physics in 9th grade. However, we do anticipate that environmental science numbers will grow as it becomes available at more of our schools. So all that being said, it's important to know that we have, as a division, responded to flexibility from VDOE already without changing local graduation requirements, yet we still have an opportunity to make it more flexible by matching the VDOE requirements for the standard diploma. So to give you the result of the steering committee and LT recommendation, we are recommending that we move to the 2-discipline requirement to match VDOE. Again, that would still require a student to take and earn 3 credits in science, but they could be more selective with what they choose for their pathway in science, if you will. As we considered this additional flexibility for science, we did carefully review all the state requirements as well as course options available. It's important to note that most Virginia school divisions do follow the state standard diploma and only require 2 disciplines. With the addition of the targeted 9th grade class for active physics as an option, as well as environmental science, we saw that this recommendation would be in line with creating additional flexibility. At this time, we do see all roads leading through biology for our students. So we do see that all of our students would graduate with biology. We do notice that there are several challenges potentially, depending on which way it's considered, or at least changes, when we recommend going to 2 disciplines as required by VDOE. Some of those challenges may be that we see a decrease in our chemistry and physics completion for our students. We may also, as a result, potentially see some decrease in staffing for chemistry and physics. However, we see the benefits of matching the consistency with our neighboring divisions as well as VDOE's requirements and the additional course flexibility that it would offer our students to outweigh those challenges for this. So we'll transition to social studies. The question we explored for social studies is, should FCPS change the local graduation requirements to match the number of credits required by VDOE for the standard diploma? This slide shows that for the FCPS standard diploma, we require 4 credits in history, while VDOE only requires 3 credits in history. So this is a difference for students in the number of elective choices that they have to earn the standard diploma. For FCPS, we require that a student earns 2 credits in world history and geography, whereas for VDOE, the students are only required to earn 1 world history and geography credit. The steering committee and LT recommendation, again, was to move to 3 credits to match the requirements for the standard diploma from VDOE. Again, there were multiple benefits that we saw to this, most importantly, seeing the additional course flexibility for students to make choices based on their interests and potentially align them with post-secondary career and education opportunities that they would like to pursue. This would, again, provide us more consistency with neighboring divisions, as most of our neighboring divisions only require 3 credits for the standard diploma. Teacher input was carefully considered as we made this recommendation. There was a note that there could, again, potentially be a decrease in social studies staffing, and there was also a potential for more mixed grade level classes in social studies, as students would have more choice and would not be in a set sequence of courses for 9th through 12th grade, potentially. And our social studies teachers, again, anticipated that that may mean more preparatory classes for them, which means that they are not teaching 1 section or 1 course with 5 sections. They would have potentially some electives or other core courses within their schedule. This is a bit of a transition. Those first 2 disciplines, content areas that we discussed with science and social studies, are the 2 that would require board action, scheduled for September 27th. Currently, we're transitioning to the 2 follow-ups on board inquiry, starting with health and physical education. The outcome that we need from the school board is a decision and a consensus on counting participation in sports required for the required health and physical education credits. So the area that we explored, the question that we explored here is, should FCPS count participation in sports as required health and physical education credits? For the standard diploma, as some background, both FCPS and VDOE are consistent with the requirements. Health and physical education 9 and 10 are required for all of our students. As a breakdown, health and physical education 9 currently has the equivalent of approximately 2/4 of health content. So while not all of that health content for the second quarter is delivered in the classroom setting, it is being integrated throughout all of our physical education classes. And then for health and PE 9 and 10, for health and physical education 10, there is one designated quarter of health and one designated quarter of driver's education. We did receive guidance from VDOE that no substitutions would be granted, no requests for substitutions would be allowed for these two courses. Working with the steering committee did recommend that we maintain our current practice and that we do not pursue advocacy or opportunity to substitute participation in athletics for the requirements of health and PE 9 or 10. There were many benefits that we found in this recommendation. First and foremost, it was that focus on wellness for our students and the desire that all of our students receive the integrated health and wellness content that's provided through the physical education standards. We also see that there is consistency with our neighboring school divisions, and we already believe that there is some flexibility for online PE classes to allow student athletes to count their activity towards that course, whether it's health and PE 9 or 10. We saw some challenges with potentially changing the current practice that I think are important to mention. First of all, we couldn't guarantee that every student would have equitable access to substituting a sport, as not all of our students are engaged in sports for a variety of reasons. We also saw, as we explored the VDOE 140 clock hour waiver policy, that there would be a significant workload associated with ensuring mastery of the content as required by that 140 clock hour waiver policy, and that would be a significant workload on both the student and the teacher and staff perspective. So we did thoroughly explore that. We looked back at some of our practices with credit by objective for our most elite athletes, and we saw that there was intense paperwork and administrative responsibility in order to maintain that practice. We also saw that we have some scheduling challenges. If we were to move to a half of a credit of required health, for example, we do not have a robust offering of semester courses across all of our schools. So pairing that in a master's schedule could prove very challenging if we were able to receive a waiver or some type of substitution from VDOE to pursue this. We would need to pursue additional semester options. So we saw that as an initial challenge for scheduling across our high schools. Transitioning to world language. The outcome that's needed from the school board, again, this is a follow-up to previous inquiries from the board. The outcome is we need a decision and some consensus on offering level 1 world language courses for high school credit in 7th grade. As background, the question we explored was, should we begin to offer those classes? Our current middle school offerings in 7th grade, most of our middle schools are offering a world language course that begins a 2-year sequence, ending or accumulating high school credit, 1 high school credit by the end of 8th grade. Additionally, we have 2 schools that have piloted a full year of level 1 Spanish in 7th grade. Those were Herndon and Franklin middle schools, and they're in about the 3rd year of that pilot. In 8th grade, currently French and Spanish are standard course offerings at all of our middle schools, and then various other languages are available as optional course offerings with variants by school and pyramid, as you know. The recommendation from the steering committee at this time is to continue to start the level 1 languages for high school credit in 8th grade and to continue exploring other options for how we can create more flexibility and opportunity for our students in the area of world language. Again, we considered many variables in this recommendation. The overwhelming response from the steering committee was the focus on balance and wellness for our students. There is a concern that by adding an additional high school credit in the 7th grade, that students would feel pressured to take that high school credit rather than continuing to explore potentially other electives. So that was the number 1 concern that came up from our steering committee. There was also a challenge expressed that it could create some difficulty in scheduling, both for the number of courses that we have available through 12th grade in given languages. Currently, when our students start in 8th grade, for the majority of our languages, we have a sequence of courses that could take them through 12th grade, whereas if a student started a year earlier, they may be finished with that language study prior to 12th grade. Additionally, there was some concern from principals about the split teacher staffing. What that means is if we divide our world languages staffing to give more to middle schools, that more of our teachers may be at more than 1 school in order to accommodate the course requests from students. Our consistency with neighboring divisions, it is different in this category. And a lot of that has to do with our neighboring divisions starting middle school and sixth grade. Many of them do begin world languages earlier than we do. When we've reached out, they've talked about how they have that extra year of middle school and sixth grade to gain exposure to middle school, and then have the choice to enter into the high school credit. So we went through the different content areas quickly to allow for time for discussion. Just in summary, before we move to that discussion, I wanted to revisit the timeline. Again, for science and social studies for the standard diploma, that would require board action, and that is currently scheduled for September 27th. We are requesting that the school board please share consensus and direction on the health and physical education as well as the world language recommendations and content areas. And anything that is recommended as far as a change will begin preparation immediately, and we hope to implement for the 2019-20 school year.
So that completes our presentation. We're ready to entertain any discussion
Wow,
and
that was a
questions.
wonderful
board has.
presentation. I
Thank you very much.
done in 15 minutes. That's
Yes,
great.
we're trying.
Okay, with that, we have more time for question and
Absolutely.
answers and
That's right.
discussion. I have Mr. Schurz and Mrs. McLaughlin, Karen Keys Gamara, we have Sandy Evans, we have everybody. Okay, thank you. Mr. Schurz.
So on the first two, can you bring up the science, the grid that shows the different concentrations, please? That one. So I have a question because we obviously offer science courses beyond what's offered here. Do they fall into these categories, or are these the only courses that count towards fulfilling the VDOE requirement?
It's a great question. We do offer additional science courses beyond these. For the most part, these are required before entering into one of those.
Okay, so these are, in order to take oceanography, for example, they have to, I don't know which one, but there's, okay. So my thought on both of these is yes and yes, particularly because some of us have been, I think, specific fans of championing methods to open up more choices. Instead of everybody being cattle herded down the same chute, that part of an education is allowing children to explore opportunities and what they think they may like. And I actually think it has a lot to do with the mental health and wellness of students, but it also has a lot to do with, I think, whether it's immediate after school, after high school graduation, or eventual career and technical education readiness. Because if you think that you love journalism and you take a journalism class, or a photography class, and you find out not so much, learning what you don't want to do is just as important as learning what you can do. It also does create the opportunity for addressing, and I do think we have an equity issue that has been raised around the technical education access to academy classes and how much they have to give up in order to access them. And I don't think that we still tell a very good story. I think we're still dealing with a parent population that largely sees CTE as VOTEC. And we have a branding problem around certification-oriented classes. And I look forward to being an early adopter champion of really pushing us to become a cybersecurity destination. I mean, we should be an outstanding producer of students that, number one, open job for the foreseeable future in matching, if you're going to go to college, you're going to wind up with a degree that you're not going to be saddled with debt, and you're going to have a job when you come out. I think this opens up a lot of possibilities for students, and it doesn't delimit them. On the flip side, I'm extremely disappointed about the athletics. We have a sports intensive student population. It's in the water, it's not going to change. And students who spend self-professed 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day on a court, on a beam, in a pool, on a field, needing to also go to PE is dumb. And I'm frustrated that the Virginia Department of Education has shut down without a discussion any possibility of a substitute, a waiver, a discussion. And this is part of the problem that we have, that we're subordinate to the Virginia Department of Education. The State Board of Education is deciding for us, not we're getting to decide for our students what's the best. And these are the times where what we want and what we know for our students can be different than the State Board of Education. So I'm annoyed at this. I don't think that we've been involved in the discussion. I don't think the students have been involved in the discussion. This is not what I hear from the students, is that they're looking for a way. You know, I just received a text earlier today that somebody can't talk to me, you know, tonight because they have to get to bed and I'm going to be out of this meeting too late, and they've got to be up to get their student to the pool at 4 o'clock in the morning. That we're in an impossible situation where we're being handcuffed by a body that's outside of this board, where we could potentially be the closest set of government to students, and I don't know the path forward on this one. On the last one, I can see that is a reasonable expectation, because in the first two, what we're saying is we're trying to find pathways to help students and potentially address mental health and wellness and life balance. But on the fourth one, if we didn't go with your recommendation, I think we would be undoing what we're doing in the first two. So I agree with 1 and 2. I vehemently disagree and see significant problems with the third for more reasons than are before us at this table right now. And then I agree with the fourth. And I would ask respectfully if you could address that concern around the third, because I had hoped for a better outcome on that. Just because one student isn't an athlete doesn't, to me, erase the fact that others are. And it's not an inequity that a kid who's not an athlete has to take PE. The real issue is a kid who's already spending 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 hours a week outside of school, outside of the 35-hour commitment to school, plus homework, plus, you know, everything else, that there's no pathway to a life balance on that one. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do think we have a little bit of time, so maybe we can engage in a little bit of discussion and understand kind of the rationale for why the recommendation with respect to health and PE. I want to back up a little bit, though, because Ms. Schultz did a really good job, I think, of articulating the rationale for why we're even having this conversation as a board to begin with, which is why I went back to this strategic plan slide, because I think it's important for people to remember in the community that there was a lot of conversation when the strategic plan was being built with community members, parents, and students saying they wanted more choice in their high school experience. And one of the areas was to look specifically at our requirements, which are more strict than the state requirements, and see how we could create more flexibility. So that's what we're attempting to do here. So I think Ms. Schultz did a really good job capturing the spirit of why we're here having this conversation. I'm going to move forward in the slides. To health and PE, and Ms. Schultz, she made the comment about being annoyed with the state requirements and the state lack of flexibility for substitutions. I can tell you that I appreciate that, and at the risk of creating more annoyance directed at me, I do want to say it should not all be directed at the state. Okay, and I want to walk everybody through this slide in a little bit more detail so that you understand kind of what's in our purview and what we might have control of with respect to options, and where we don't have flexibility with respect to options. So Also, I would say that the steering committee, with respect to this particular issue, it was really, really difficult because on its face, I think everybody recognizes that it would make sense to be able to recognize the amount of effort and time that students are putting into these activities. Jen and I actually have our own kids who are 8 years old, playing in the same soccer club on the same soccer team about 20 hours a week, and we're looking at it and saying, oh my goodness, look at how much effort these 8-year-olds are putting in, right? We know what varsity athletes, JV athletes, you know, and others, right, that put into these programs and these endeavors. The problem that we have is when you start to look at some of the things that we have control over in terms of, and I'm going to flip forward in my notes just for a second because I want to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything that we want to mention, and I'll kind of keep my comments parallel to the slide that we have here. When you look at the things that we can control in terms of options, we do have some options for the students. So understanding that the state said there's no one-to-one substitution, we're not just going to let you grant credit, PE credit for football. That's not going to happen. And we can always go back and continue to advocate and lobby at the state level, and perhaps we might be able to get that changed. And we're working on the legislative program right now. That could be something that the board might want us to include in that legislative program. But understanding that the current state does not allow for that, what do we control? And there are a few things that we do control. One, first of all, is the access to the online coursework. So students do have the ability to enroll in online coursework if they want more flexibility in their schedule. And we have the ability to work with them to fulfill the PE requirements and have those be met by their participation in their particular athletic activity. What we don't have control of right now is how our schedule is structured to teach health, PE, and driver's ed all together in a 2-year sequence.
Before you
Go
go
ahead.
further, can I just,
Yeah.
I want to get a clarification on the
Yeah,
point
yeah.
you just said about working with them to utilize the online with their activity. Are you saying that in 9th or 10th grade, if somebody takes online PE as one of their existing 7 courses, which means they won't have to pay for it, that they can use the credit of their athletics and then they don't actually have to do any additional work?
Their activity. So their activity that they're putting towards the sport, they could wear a fitness tracker or they can get sign-off permission from the coach that verifies their activity, and that could count right for what they would have had to do.
Because there are multiple components of that course. And that's the part the steering committee had a lot of discussion around. There's the physical athletic component, the physical activity and the athletic component of the course, but then there's the health and wellness components of the course as well, right? In that integrated nature, 2 quarters at 9th grade, 1 quarter at 10th grade, nobody on the steering committee felt like that would be something that we would be able to compromise or find an alternative approach for. But perhaps within this online environment, if students were able to get credit for what they're doing for the physical activity and athletic component, that would allow them a lot of flexibility in meeting much of that requirement. Then they would complete the remaining requirements related to health and wellness within the online course. So basically, many of their requirements would already be met by what they're doing in athletics. They would still get the benefit of the health and wellness components, and they could do it online and they could do it for free, freeing up space in their schedule. So it's definitely not perfect, and I know it's not what the board looked for, but I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that that is something that we believe that we could start to pursue.
Does the online component have to be done at home?
Not technically. It's going to depend on student schedules and everything about where they are. If there's supervision in the school for them to be able to complete the course in the school.
I still feel like we're threading the needle based on what the state requirements are, and
Right.
we're trying to navigate where flexibility could happen while having our hands handcuffed. And that's my frustration with this, and that, you know, what I'm disappointed in, where you sort of created the opportunity for more discussion in the success of world language 7th grade,
Right.
is this looks like, nah, we're kind of done. We've done our work here. And I don't feel like this is a conversation that should end. I do think that we are hampered at the state level. I do think that makes it challenging around our legislative discussions and when we can be flexible and when we can't based on our student population. And I think that's a serious consideration for us as a board in terms of how we're impacted by other bodies mandating for us and where we have flexibility to have that discussion. And even when, when the health component, you're talking 3/4. So you're talking, out of 2 years, half of the time in the 2 years, we're non-flexible about. For me, none of my students took driver's ed through FCPS. That's 3 students. That's 1/4 for each that I have no flexibility on. And I don't see that, frankly, Dr. Braybrand, I don't see that as us being very innovative. The fact that we don't have choices that other students could explore, that's on us. Why don't we? And why aren't we innovative in the delivery of opportunities? There's internship opportunities, there are all kinds of things where this is an opportunity for us to excel and show ourselves differently versus, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, I would just add to that. The only part where I would disagree a little bit with the characterization is I don't want necessarily for any board member to feel like we're eliminating any further discussion on this topic. That's what we were trying to do with the online option, is to see if there's some flexibility that would create there.
I'm just
there
saying,
may be other there
the
may
way
be
this
other
was
things we could do.
presented, the world language part says, continuing conversation. This says no change. So it's just been presented this way that it appears that we're finished with the conversation here, where the next, the 4th topic seems a little bit more open-ended and more solution-driven or solution-oriented still.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, that was great. Mrs. McLaughlin next, and then to be followed by Kerangis Kamara, Ms. Evans, Karen Colby-Sanders.
Great, thank you. First, I just want to share with my colleagues that I would like to have a discussion today about the timing. This, I think, has some really great suggestions and some maybe great improvements for our students. But it's making some changes, and I'm a little uncomfortable that because this was a new business item on September 13th, but the board just got the presentation now on September 17th, and we would essentially be voting on it on the 27th. That's giving us 10 calendar days, not even 10 business days, to reach out to our community and get stakeholder input. So I would like people to consider that this is one of those things where I think we would benefit from a 4-week or, a good month to put this out to the community. Yes, Dr. Presidio?
Yeah, if I could speak to that, because I think you're right, and we really struggled with that. So again, and we have a slide I could go back to it. Maybe Jen will go back to the timeline for me. But remember, we started this conversation really 2 years ago, and the steering committee that met last year completed their recommendations, brought those to LT in the spring, and we were ready to bring this forward to the board in the spring, which would give you much more time, right? But we weren't able to do it just with the board calendar. So in order for us, if we were to make changes to take effect in 1920, we have to do it now, because we have to do it this fall, because we have to notify the state. There's some compliance work that we have to do with the state. Then we have to redo all of our course materials and everything, and all of that process starts late fall, early winter. If you would just stick with me for just 1 second, because I understand the concern about the timeliness. So if the board didn't want to move forward for 1920, and you needed more time to consider it, you definitely could do that. But if you wanted to move forward for 1920, we'd have to be on this timeline, because we couldn't get on another work session that would give you enough time to consider it before we'd have to make the changes.
I didn't want another work session, so I'm so glad you're asking clarity. I'm only saying we would postpone the vote by 2 weeks. That's it. Nothing, no more delays. It would just be we would get 2 more weeks of community input so
And
that
you
we're ready to vote on the action item 2 weeks later.
And we definitely, so I appreciate that clarity. We definitely could push back the vote probably a 2-week window. I don't think we could go much more than that, though, or we'd risk being able to implement in 1920.
Amen. And I absolutely did not want to, I did not want to bring, A, I was not going to suggest that we bring this back for another work session discussion. B, absolutely understand the importance. I just meant from an action vote, we could just postpone by 2 weeks. And if
Absolutely.
that's something, again, other board members, it sounds like what you're saying is that's workable.
I think we can do that.
And
Yeah,
that
we
would
can
be,
do
that would be my preference.
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. Secondly, I really appreciate the crosswalk you did with our standard diploma and FCPS versus VDOE. Have we done a crosswalk with our advanced diploma requirements to their advanced diploma requirements?
They match.
They match, okay. So no worries there. But, so I will just comment and say that for your recommendations here on social science and the sciences, I really love the proposals. I think that just having spent over the weekend talking with a family, military family, moved here from Coronado, California, daughters are in high school, and that coming from California Common Core, coming here, one of the students is a junior, the impact on that young lady's, schedule is very real. And so this is, to me, a way that we can be very sensitive fact that this is a transient area, people move around. So I'm very comfortable with what's being proposed here.
Just real briefly on that point, because Ms. McLaughlin brings up a really important point. Virginia has one of the most standardized approaches to a high school diploma in the country. And we do have a number of students, particularly military families, that move here from other states and get caught up in that quite a bit. But even the students that have matriculated through our system, K through 12, get caught up in the fact that there's not as much choice to pursue a diploma as there are in other states.
So even though I was advocating for a 2-week delay, it's mostly so I just feel like people have a chance to digest it. But I feel like the solutions in those areas are extremely welcomed. In terms of the third item, health and PE.
Mrs. McLaughlin, just to be clear on my mind, when this goes into effect for 2019, 2020, are you saying that they can affect all four-year students, freshmen through seniors, or is that going to be phased-in approach? I mean, I just want to know.
Right,
what you-
retroactive.
Right. So typically, whenever a new graduation requirement or set of graduation requirements is implemented, it starts with incoming ninth graders. And that would be the recommendation
That would
on
be
this.
the recommendations rather than that can affect.
Correct. We do have some waivers available that meet the state requirements for students who are military connected, for example, or otherwise transferring into us later. So we have some flexibility to continue to support them.
Yeah, my point with that comment, because I saw Ms. Corbett Sanders, is that students that are coming from other states realize how much less choice they have here than they've had in other states, right? So we find a way to make sure that we're granting the credit that they need to grant, but it's very different than their experiences many other places.
Yeah, as you know, I have one of the largest populations of military-connected students, and the thing that we constantly find is that the students don't know about the interstate compact. And I would actually, I'll send you a point of contact for somebody who can work with that family, Megan, because there's the military parent liaisons who can actually help them go through that process.
Okay, Mrs. McLaughlin, continue.
Well, I guess I appreciate Mr. Moon bringing that up because about the retroactivity option, I, again, pose it to my colleagues and Dr. Braybrand, as well as staff, why couldn't it be, if the state allows us one way or the other, make it retroactive? We see that this is beneficial, especially for students coming into our system, to legally earn a standard diploma, and the only obstacle is our requirements. If it's our requirements, then it's our decision. And so I would like, whether or not, if you can speak to it now or you want to speak to it later, but I'm not comfortable that we would make it no, only on a going forward incoming ninth graders. We're actually trying to help students. So I don't want to postpone helping students. I want to say if we think this is good for kids, then it's in effect 2019-20, and counselors work with kids, and it might actually reduce some of the stress on children trying to earn that standard diploma now, not sorry we passed it and you're still stuck with, frankly, is FCPS overweighting these kids with requirements?
I think we can look at that as a next step. I mean, as Jen said, typically the process is perspective, and you're looking forward and you're
Sure.
forecasting what
Yeah.
students are going to take more than just a year in advance, right?
Right.
And many of the students, if you tried to apply this retroactively, would have already gone beyond the flexibility that we're considering granting here. But for those students that haven't, that's something that we can look at and see if there's a way for us to systematize that.
Yeah, I think in the end, I know we want to be putting students first. And if we know this is good for kids, then this is just about us internally handling it. And I do think we should look for ways to help kids earn the standard diploma, especially since it meets state regs and we're the barrier. And then my one final thing on the fourth item that was presented on world languages starting in the 7th grade. I really appreciated what Jen Glazer said. As having 3 boys who just got out of the system and all headed into college with university requirements for foreign language competency. It's great when kids can be taking a foreign language in their senior year, because the foreign language knowledge is as fresh as possible before they roll into that. So I'm totally in favor for it. However, I look forward to Mr. McElveen weighing in. He's our world language guru. That I don't necessarily think that's a reason we don't start foreign language in 7th grade. And so I would like maybe more discussion on that topic, whether today or going forward, because foreign language fluency, we know in this global world, is so essential. And we know that our students benefit from it. So to me, again, when there was a concern about life balance, I think since it doesn't give students weights to their GPA, typically that's a driver sometimes for kids, then some may have a passion for learning a foreign language and they want to start in their 7th grade. My boys, some of the electives in middle school, they were grasping. It just was where their interests were or weren't. They were grasping to find something. They might have benefited from starting foreign language a year earlier, and that would have been more beneficial to their language competency. And so that's something I think we need more exploration. Again, I'm so sensitive being the daughter of a teacher, but we can't make decisions based on the impact it has on staffing, especially when sometimes we're hearing that we're having trouble with foreign language instruction. We need to make it based on what's best for education. And Mr. Moon, I did realize there was one other thing I wanted to touch on with the health and PE thing. As a parent who had 3 athletes, I mean, I certainly saw where it'd be great that it could count toward online. But Dr. Brabrand, this goes to not just online PE, but all of our online courses. I remain very troubled at what we are charging our families. If you have 7 courses, then it's free. But for a lot of these kids, with the things they want to build into their curriculum, this health and PE online option might be your 8th class. And especially if you're an athlete and you can fulfill most of the time requirements, you wouldn't mind having that 8th class so you can get an elective. But $800 puts that out of reach for a lot of families. I would have been hard pressed to say to my boys, that's going to be $1,600 per child. And I had 2 in high school almost every year for like 5 years straight. So I think if we look at the option that staff, thank you for identifying, you could do online, your sports can count toward it, but we need to do this at a cost neutral, not $800 across the board, because that's just what we put the price tag on for these online classes, because that puts it out of reach for kids, and it doesn't address the problem that I want every kid getting the driver's ed they need, and I want them to getting that really critical health curriculum component. But this would be fantastic if we looked at the online PE at an affordable price for our families and helping kids. So those were my points.
Okay, I have Karen Kiss-Gamara to be followed by Ms. Evans.
Okay, I will try to be brief. I actually agree with my colleagues. One of my primary concerns in reading over this initially was I wasn't sure whether community groups had an opportunity to weigh in, whether our teachers associations, whether our special education associations, how they might feel about some of these changes. And so I would fully support at least the 2-week delay to allow that, because it doesn't sound like we were able to do that ahead of time, at least based on what I heard.
I mean, we did with those groups that you mentioned. We could always do more, right? But that was part of the steering committee review process. We met over a period of several months,
Okay.
3 very extensive meetings, and in between, representatives on the steering committee reached out to their constituencies.
Okay. All right. I still would support the 2-week delay.
Oh, absolutely. No, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I do like proposals 1 and 2. Anytime our kids can get more electives and have an opportunity to explore, it's a good thing. I would caution any presupposition that we may need to decrease staff for chemistry or social studies. I know for my kids, there was a social studies class where they were discussing politics. I don't know where that came about. But at any rate, they absolutely loved it. And so I would hate to see the opportunity for access to some of those things, that they might be able to explore chemistry in a more creative way and a less rigid way. So I would, I don't know how much we discuss with respect to the possible decrease with our teachers associations, but I would be concerned about that.
Yeah, at the risk of, going too far down this path, because you're speculating about what the impact is going to be, but as a former high school principal, and Dr. Braybrand was a high school principal, and Jen was a high school DSS, you staff based on the courses that students choose to take, right? And,
Sure.
and in Fairfax, that means the courses that they're required to take, because there's limited choice, right? But for the most part, you're staffing based on what students are choosing to enroll in. So if you reduce a requirement, you know that some students are not going to continue to choose to take that course. They're going to take something else, which is the whole point of doing this, right? Is to free up an opportunity in the schedule for students to be able to pursue something that they're more interested in. So that staffing doesn't change. The amount of staffing that you have is based on the number of kids that you have, and it's aligned to how many students are taking particular courses. So there will be some changes. You're right. It doesn't mean that everybody is going to stop taking a particular course. That's not going to be the case. But there will be some reduction in that course load, which means there will be some reduction in that particular subject area.
And I just want to make sure that our teachers associations and things of that nature have a heads up for what that could possibly mean with respect to staff changes. With respect to the health and PE, as a mother of 3 athletes who, some of whom had, the equivalent of a part-time job, I do think we need to press a little bit further into, how we can get some equivalency, because if I could have bought more time, I'll put $500 for 2 hours more study time, I would have done it. So I just think, we really need to look at what this means for families. I know families, as Ms. Schultz mentioned, who are getting up and getting their kids to swimming every single day. Gymnastics is same kind of thing. It is essentially, and if that child has a passion for it, trust me, I was certainly happy to let my kid stop doing it. He just wouldn't stop. I was like, you don't have to do that. Pick another sport. No, Mom, I want this. Are you sure? In any case, but my point is we have to be cognizant of that. We have these kids, and I don't think I agree. I think there was a comment of, is this equitable? Well, I think we have to look at the reality of where we are and what our kids are taking advantage of. I was constantly worried. I'm constantly worried at the level of, this is their passion, but what is that doing to their opportunity to study, to rest? And so for that reason, I would agree with Ms. Schultz. With respect to foreign language, I think we're going to have to balance that. If we're going to put more resources in the foreign language, quite frankly, I'd love to see it more in the earlier grades when we know that it lines up with brain development, et cetera. And so for that reason, I would agree with the recommendation we have here.
Okay, I have a Ms. Evans to be followed by Ken Colby-Sanders.
So thank you very much for bringing us these options. I'll state right up front, I do support the recommendations on the science and the social studies. I think those are excellent options. I agree with Ms. McLaughlin that it would be better, and some of my other colleagues, to have it at the first October meeting, so we could send it around. The other opportunity, that would also give us more of an opportunity. The Student Advisory Council meets for the first time on September 25th. I think it would be valuable to have all of these presented to them. I mean, I think that you're in charge of that first meeting, Dr. Brabrand, but I think it makes sense for that group to review it and be made aware. So that would be my advocacy on that, to take it to them. I also tend to agree that why not just do it right away, you know, for those that would benefit from it. I'm not sure what we gain by saying it would only apply to freshmen. I mean, if there are legal reasons we couldn't do it, but I'm not seeing them. So I think I agree with that as well. Why not just go ahead and do it for those that could benefit? Question. What impact, if any, does this have on IB schools? Does the social studies and the science requirements make any difference for those at IB schools?
The quick answer is it will function in an IB school just fine, and it will work well for them. I do want to point out that the sequence for social studies actually suits the IB schools even more cleanly than it does for AP schools.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because I know there's sometimes a disconnect between what IB requires and what we require, and that's caused a problem. So I was hoping this would actually give us more flexibility to deal
It's
with that
very
issue.
Good.
Good,
And
okay.
the IB diploma requirements are really more attached to the advanced studies diploma.
Okay. On health and PE, I'd like to see us keep on looking at this. I think for those athletes, particularly very intense 3-season athletes, I would like to see more flexibility. I hear what you're saying about the scheduling issues, and they do need to get their wellness. Now, I have to mention a concern. If a student didn't take health and PE and then replaced it instead with their 7th AP course, and then just, overwhelm themselves even more, that would be my fear on that they would, opt out of that and then be overwhelmed in another way. So I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of, but I would like us to continue that conversation, as well as on the 7th grade world languages. I think I'm tending to saying we probably should allow it if as long as it's offered at all of our middle schools. We'd have to be sure, as a matter of equity, that every 7th grader had the ability to take it, that there weren't some who didn't have access to it. But assuming they did, I don't know why we wouldn't, because I hear you about what happens in 12th grade. Then I think we can handle that. I mean, there's nothing, if a student really loved languages, well, they could take a different language.
I just want to, I always, when I'm speaking with the board, I just want to be really transparent.
Sure.
So I also feel compelled to really represent the feelings of the steering committee, right? So I'm somebody who, my students are doing immersion. They did it since they were in preschool, right? I believe very strongly in language acquisition. Others, though, when you look at this issue, I think raised legitimate concerns about the middle school experience and really wanting to make sure that students had a lot of opportunity to explore as many choices and options as possible in middle school, because there's such little choice in the FCPS educational experience to begin with, right? Students are very limited in the amount of choices they get to make. I'm not saying that necessarily you should be persuaded by that point, but I do feel definitely compelled to let you know that all of the middle school educators on the steering committee felt very, very strongly that they did not want to reduce the amount of choice that students would be exposed to at middle school. And when and one of the concerns is, it's not just as easy as saying, well, the students that would choose to do this at seventh grade can choose to do that, and the students that don't want to choose to do something else. Because, and I think it's true, in Fairfax, once you create something that's available, it's like survival of the fittest, right? Everybody wants to
That's true.
compete, and they're going to feel like if they're not doing it, then they're falling behind because
behind.
they started language at 8th grade or 9th grade. So that was really a lot of the sentiment and a lot of the concern that was expressed by middle school educators when they looked at this.
And this is both in the world languages and in the health and PE. I do think we need to be talking to parents and students about both of those, because at this point, we are hearing one very strong voice, but I think you might hear something different from parents and students, even those who, in the case of world languages, might not say, my student has to take the max possible, but might have a real love of languages and think that that's important. I mean, there are parents who think we really should be starting this very intensively in kindergarten, because that's, I mean, there are a lot of parents who feel that way, right? And yeah, I mean, I'm preaching the choir here. So I think that's, as we move forward, I'd like to continue that conversation. And I'd like to put one more thing, and it's a new one, on the radar screen. When I was at the at some AVID celebrations and reviews at high schools and middle schools this last spring, it was raised to me, could we have AVID qualify as either a CTE requirement or as a fine and practical art? I did pursue this, and I didn't get a very positive answer to it, but the answer I got was, well, we could continue the conversation. And as I don't know how many, I think most of my colleagues are familiar with AVID and what a great program that is in terms of preparing our students for college and career. So to my mind, I think that would be a good match for, I'm going to advocate for this, because I think it would be a good match for CTE, as well as because fine arts include, under the state definition, practical arts. And if there's ever a practical art, I would say it was with AVID. So I would put that out to my colleagues and to you, Dr. Presidio, and to you, Dr. Brabrand. As we're continuing these conversations, I would like to put that on the radar screen as a possibility for your steering committee to consider.
Yeah, so I would just say, I mean, everybody on the leadership team really supports AVID. We'd like to be able to expand AVID. We're looking at any possible opportunities and options to do that right now. So maybe we could capture that as a next step in terms of looking at what course requirements we might be able to fulfill with the AVID course.
With the approval of my colleagues, I would very much like to have that as the next step.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Karen Colbert-Sanders to be followed by Ms. Pelchick, to be followed by Ms. Pat Hines.
Thank you, and thank you for this report and the work that the steering committee put into putting forth their recommendations. I fully support the recommendation for the science and social studies for the standard diploma. I think that that creates additional opportunities for our students, especially for students that would have challenges otherwise in fulfilling all of the requirements. So I think that's a good move in the right direction. I am going to echo my colleagues' concerns about finding an alternative for solving the health and PE problem. It seems to me that if we could somehow have, it looks like it's 1 year of health curriculum along with the driver's ed. So is there a way that we should be advocating at the state level that becomes a 1 year requirement, and then have the flexibility for the PE? And I want to address Ms. McLaughlin's comment about the cost of online physical education and urge people to think about the fact that most of our students that are in sports are paying fees to participate in some way or another. And so then requiring them to pay again for online, it's almost a double whammy because they're already paying for that participation fee. So I would just urge that we look at that differently. And then I want to talk about world languages. And I would urge that we really look at and support having the 7th grade world language at a minimum. I mean, I think many of my colleagues agree that we should be doing languages earlier rather than just starting it today. It's in 8th grade. When I went through Fairfax County Public Schools, I took foreign language in 7th grade. So I was able to take 3 years of French and realize that I was never going to be very good at it, enough to live successfully in a French-speaking country, but not pass as a French person. And then switched over to Spanish, which was a language I was more comfortable with. That's the type of opportunity that we create for our kids. And back then, there was, you got brownie points for doing more than one language. So I would urge that we provide that type of flexibility. And at a minimum, I'm a little concerned that these recommendations where we're saying, not ready, and it'll have impact on staffing, or it'll have impact on this issue or that issue. I would suggest we need a little bit more data before, these are more of a qualitative reasoning, and I understand the knee-jerk reaction. We kind of had it for sleep for many years. And ask the staff to take a deeper dive on this. And at a minimum, the 2 schools where this has been piloted, and they're now in their 3rd year, it sounds like it's working. We don't see that it's not. I would love to see it piloted over on the eastern side of the county, where there actually may offer an additional added benefit. And the additional added benefit is that in schools where there is a significant population of newcomers who are Spanish or literate in Spanish, but may not have, all of the skills in their native language, that would be a great way of building confidence for those students to be able to get credit, verified credit, or get credits in 7th and 8th grade, or 7th grade initially. So that's where I'm at on that. And that's it.
Just if I could, a few comments that I want to respond to. Just so everybody understands the current state for 7th graders, it's not that students don't have the option to start taking a language in 7th grade. They do, and they can earn credit for it, but it's over a 2-year sequence. So again, I just want everybody to understand the current state, and I'm not trying to persuade somebody that we shouldn't shift in a different direction. The other comment that you made about essentially a foreign language course for native speakers is a really important point, and we do have that opportunity in place right now in many of our schools, where we have high percentages of ESOL students.
But I think that's in our high schools. What I'm looking for is this being a 7th grade option. Is it available as a 7th grade option where they get a credit in 7th grade for Spanish?
In 7 of our middle schools currently.
We do, at Herndon, they're piloting both the Spanish one and the Spanish one for fluent speakers, so at 7th grade. Mm-hmm.
And I would ask that in addition to doing it at Herndon, we would be doing it at a middle school in the eastern side of the county, where we have as significant populations of Spanish speakers.
Done? Okay, I have Ms. Palching next.
Okay, thank you. Briefly on the first 2, I agree with my colleagues, especially seeing that kids take as many APs now in 1 year as I took in my whole high school career at TJ 17 years ago. I think it's really important to give more flexibility, also to allow different courses to be hopefully created in those departments by teachers who are excited about an area and students who will want to learn about it more deeply. So I agree with that. I also agree with postponing the vote by 2 weeks. I think it would be helpful for us, especially just coming back, to have a little bit more time for input from the community and from the students. That's a great idea. Health and PE. Yeah, I appreciate the perspective, because I do think while it's difficult and some of those decisions aren't on our side, some are not, we do also have to think about access, equity, what it will mean, the effects on students across the board. Everything you brought up, I think, is important. It doesn't seem like we're there yet. World language, which is one I'm very passionate about, and I appreciate all the conversations Ms. Klemenko has had with me. I wanted to be sure that we were clear that students can take, which was not the case years ago, 1A in 7th grade and 1B in 8th grade. And while I think ideally, it sounds like great. Why don't we just start with 1A in 7th grade? I think there are a couple of things that I believe in the balanced approach, and we should be cautious of. They're not all about staffing. Some of them are about language development and curriculum and instruction and education. So, I've taught at programs where children start 3-4 times a week in kindergarten, and level 1 is challenging in 7th grade. And it's not until 6th, 7th, 8th grade that the brains are really there to be able to do a lot of the grammar and everything else that's included in there. So for kids to feel successful and to have the opportunity to try it in 7th grade and to be able to reach, language can't be rushed, and so to be able to reach those levels that they need. The other thing, and staffing is important, the other thing is, and maybe there would be ways to combat that, but if we mostly offer Spanish and French in middle school and kids don't have an option to try other languages until high school, we may be, once again, creating this unexpected consequence of reducing the number of languages we now offer, which is something we're trying to combat. So I just think we have to think about that ahead of time of, well, starting 2 levels in middle school, narrow our scope of language offerings if more students are not going into other languages in high school. So that's something I think we should consider. And finally, I think, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, Ms. Kizgamara, we do have to, I believe, start at the lower levels until we figure out, I don't have a single immersion school in all of Providence District. Until we figure out how to get language, staffing, instruction, programming to more of our kids earlier on so that they're getting more access and figuring out what are our goals. Is our goal just FLES, where they're getting this really just exposure once a week, which the proficiency won't get very far? Is it to do integration, which is in between that little bit to immersion, or do we want kids to get to a higher level of proficiency by the time they're middle school? So I think we do have to address that before we start up here to try to, push kids into the language. From what it sounds like, the main thing being giving them more options in high school and more flexibility with their credits. And so I want us to balance giving kids that flexibility that's important with what's best for language instruction and that lifelong learning and love of language. So I agree with staff. I don't think that we're there yet. I do agree with Ms. Corbett-Sanders that I'd love to see. We have 3 years now of data from 2 of our middle schools. So as a next step, I would love for us to see more of how that's worked and before we make any decisions on how to move forward. But thank you.
Ms. Hines?
Yeah, thank you. I also just think we need more conversation about both the 7th grade language and the PE issues. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions. I teach at a model whole school immersion school in Arlington right now, Key Elementary School. Whole school, kindergarten through 5th grade all day, or half a day in Spanish, half a day in English, every kid in the building. And I think it's a really great program. Actually, it's the best way to do it. We don't have we don't do it that way here, and I know there are reasons for that, and we've talked about that. But it's, if anybody wants to talk to the folks, which you may have already done, but if you want to talk to somebody, I'm happy to make an introduction. But I think that it's problematic to kind of create something in 7th grade that you're right. If you build it, they will come, and then we'll have everybody thinking that they have to take that language in 7th grade. And then we end up with the same problem we have with math, is as soon as you make advanced math available, you have kids getting to high school who have taken all kinds of high school math, but they're missing some basic stuff when they get to high school. And we move too fast around here. And also on PE, the equity question is interesting. So I had a question. Are we thinking that it would only, or have we not thought this far, that it would only be varsity athletes who would get the, because that does create an equity question.
I mean, those were some of the very questions that the steering committee struggled with. Is it a varsity athletes? What about the student that does gymnastics or dance or what?
Marching band.
Right. So all of those things, we'd have to figure out how we would address all of those types of questions.
Right. So that's, well, and then we're talking about a lot of kids if we go beyond varsity. But obviously if we stick to varsity, I mean, it's harder to get on a varsity team around here than almost anything else, right?
Predominantly you won't be in varsity in 9th and 10th grade anyway.
That's true.
So that's not.
It would be JV or freshman, and that would count. Okay. All right. Well, that's helpful. Then let's keep talking about that. On social studies and science, I think I'm with the majority of folks here that we do need to make that change. I think it's important. The extra 2 weeks, I think, can't hurt. I did hear, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard Norm Hall of SEPTA at our citizen participation say that SEPTA, Special Education PTA, supports this, right? So that's good. I thought I heard that, and I hope they continue to weigh in. So one last question. If we make the change, social studies and science, I think I heard you say that it's cost neutral, but is that dollar sign cost neutral or opportunity cost neutral? Do you know what I mean? If we keep the dollars the same, are kids going to lose opportunities because of some of the things you've talked about, which is it might change course offerings and the likelihood that we'll have enough kids in a school for a course? So in other words, if we wanted to eliminate opportunity costs and say we will offer the same courses that we offer now, right? That's going to cost more money, right? Because we would have smaller classes, no?
So, yeah, I don't think I really addressed that very well, so I apologize for that. I was just speaking about how the staffing is going to change, right? So we're not talking about eliminating any course options because those same courses are still going to be taught because 2/3 of our kids pursue an advanced studies diploma. What it means is now if you create that flexibility in science and social studies, for example, 1/3 of your kids, some proportion of that 1/3 of those kids will choose to take something else, which is the whole reason we're even doing this, right? What are they going to choose to take? And the staffing has to go from what they are currently taking, those science and social studies courses, to that different course that they're going to take. So there's not additional costs, but the staffing is shifting and moving from one place and one course to a different place.
Okay, so it's really just the effect on our current staff that they would have to, as you said, they'd have another prep or they'd have another section.
Which is a very important consideration, right? Like we're always thinking about students first, and we need to do that, right? That is what we do, but we also are a caring culture, and we want to be thinking about the consequences, unintended often, that our decisions might have on our staff as well, so.
Okay, but from a budget standpoint, this is cost neutral, yeah?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I am Ms. Darren Colfax next.
Alrighty, I am, as my colleagues are good in the changes to the standard diploma, so I have no further comments on that. But on the next two items, I think I'm lining up with a couple, but I think we're in the minority. Ms. Patrick, I agree with you wholeheartedly on the challenges if we do not have elementary school figured out, because your district is very much like mine, and then you start taking a high school level course in 7th grade. And I had the benefit of being the meeting manager, so I'm going to ask this question, and I know the answer already. So in the pilot, how many people ask their kids' high school grade to be expunged?
So Jen's looking for that statistic right now so that we can make sure that we give you the accurate information. The vast majority of our kids were successful in the courses, like 80+% earning A's and B's. But a large number and percentage of the students earning B's ask for their grade to be expunged, and then they're going to repeat the class and take it again because, of course, you want to earn an A in the course because this is something that will be affecting your high school transcript. So that is one of the, again, unanticipated
It's an unanticipated
outcomes from our pilot schools.
Exactly.
So.
Thank you for
And
sharing
you're
that,
essentially
because
taking it in 2 years. They're
you're
taking
taking it in 2 years the way it was intended
Right.
to anyways, and you know that from being a teacher, and the pilot has filtered that out. And I'm also not in favor of that, number one, because we don't have elementary school figured out. Number two, because the pilot shows that this happened. And number three, for something that, the arts. The arts gets a real short shaft if we start giving a 7th grade course in language. If you want to experiment with chorus, or if you want to experiment with orchestra or band, those are full semesters. And then you basically have, if you're a musical kid, you don't have any other options then. And we're already talking about not allowing our kids to have any options. So I'm talking about an artistic kid, and they say they want to take band and chorus. They can do no other electives all through middle school. They can't take the language. They can't explore art. They can't explore AVID. They can't explore these other things that are there. And so, while you think it's not a big deal to allow a 7th grade language, there are real issues that can arise, and particularly if you're just having the kid take it twice anyway because their grade was a B or a B plus instead of an A. So we have to think about that in terms of that. And in terms of the stress it puts, because I know this board is very mindful about the stress we're putting on students, so we have to think about that as we make certain changes. And I say that also when we talk about, I'm also wanting to keep the no change recommendation with our current practices in PE. I'm talking specifically because they talk the lack of equity. That is a huge issue in many of my schools. And also, not to mention, as a mom who just went through kids graduating recently, PE can be high school recess. And that is a stress relief. And you learn other things than you learn from it, rather an intense, if you are a varsity athlete or a JV athlete in one of those, big sports. It's a different outlet. It's a stress relief. And it's something I think that is, if we consider just saying, oh, if you're an athlete, check the box. I think we could be adding additional stressors to the kids, and there's not a clean way to do it, but I am very much in favor of the no change right now for those reasons.
Okay, I'm gonna take my turn. I have Mr. McElvin to follow me. Mr. Wilson, you wanna be on the list? You're the last one left. Okay, thank you. Thank you. With that, let me take an easier one first. 2-week delay. I think there seems to be a consensus on that, on voting, on making this retroactive. That I will support that. When we usually do a phased implementation, that's when we impose more requirements. Generally, we do that, right? We are just relaxing it. It's helping students. I think as long as there is no statutory, regulatory prohibition for us to do that, I think allowing current students to have a benefit of that, I don't see the reason why we shouldn't do that. Social studies and science, I would say yes and yes. I think there seems to be just unanimous support for that. On PE, I differ with my co-meeting manager here on my right-hand side. She said that this could be a stress reliever. I believe that could be it too. But at the same time, I'm remembering one of my boys who did just one sports. that, had he had an opportunity to use the PE time for something else, not necessarily just another academic course. He could have taken orchestra, he could have done theater arts, something else. It was taking that opportunity away because now this is forced upon, in addition to as a freshman and sophomore, he was only on freshman and JV team, but still he did a lot of physical exercise. So I think this is something, since we need a waiver or change on the state level, that if our staff could, with a majority support, I don't know how this is gonna go at the board table. If there is a majority support for us to continue looking at this so that we can advocate at this on the state level, that I hope that we can will be able to do that. On the world languages, probably you guys don't have to hear from me how I am passionate about providing opportunities for our students to study world languages at a much earlier age. I even think the 7th grade is way too late to start learning another language. So in that regard, I agree with Ms. Perchik that we gotta start from much earlier age. However, approach-wise, the fact that we're not really doing much more for the elementary school students should not be precluding us expanding opportunities for our middle schoolers and 7th graders. That giving more choice. This is giving more choice for our middle school students to try out different languages. Someone said 3 years of French. Was it you? And I had 3 years of French when I was in high school. I wasn't good at it, but there was an opportunity I had. You could try 3 years, 2 years, and then you could go to German, could go to Russian, I could go to Chinese. For there may be students intentionally wanting to do first 4 years, studying something very foreign to them for 4 years, and from 7th grade all the way up to a sophomore year, and then 11th and 12th grade could try even a different language at a much higher level. Let's say there's somebody who may be a fluent native Spanish speaker, do not want to start from level 1. But by the time the students get junior year, might want to do AP Spanish or level 4 Spanish and become really proficient in the language. So it's a giving more opportunity to our students. And as far as grade is concerned, I know what my meeting co-manager said about students wanting to expunge their record. Now there are students, they can do that with their math classes. It's nothing different from that. Why not? Why not? If you consider, we may consider, by the way, Algebra 1 as a high school course. There are many countries in the world. Algebra 1 is not a high school course because that is very easy math, and we consider that. We consider that to be a high school course. If we are letting 7th graders take Algebra 1 in middle school, I don't see why not. I don't see why we're not allowing them to take another world language class, a 7th grader, as a high school course. I think I said enough on this one. Mr. McElvin.
Well, I appreciate Moonshine giving me the last word, right? Last word. Okay, so on PE, I'm with my colleagues who want to explore this further. When it comes to legislative program on both this and any other issues, I do think we should push where we can for more flexibility. If the board ends up deciding not to use it, that's fine. But I think the more we can push forward this conversation, the better. I do recall Chap Peterson had some PE bill a couple years ago. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was calling for more PE. So anyway, we might have to have some hard conversations with our legislators on this. On the language issue, I'm very much with my colleague, Mr. Moon. I think that I'm approaching this from someone who has a wife who teaches 5th, 6th grade Chinese at Sidwell, and the kids do just fine, and they go on and they reach much higher levels by the time they graduate. They end up getting college courses waived and getting to higher levels there. So, whereas Sloan says, if you build it, they will come. I'm happy for them to come and take that course. So I do, for all the reasons my colleagues have mentioned, support opening that up and having further conversation. I will say that I do think the board needs to have, as much as the chairman will hate this, to have a deeper dive into language. We started with the internationalization piece, which was really looking at everything, but I know Sloan knows that there's great passion on this board for language and getting it right and putting money towards it as we look to our budget next year.
Just one point on that, and Dr. Brabrand and I are maybe making the same point, I'm not sure. But we do have a board work session as a follow-up to the last work session scheduled for November. We're working on trying to do some pricing with financial services to look at some costs for expanding world language at elementary, middle, and high school. So that is going to come back. That conversation is going to come back to the board relatively soon.
Excellent. Okay, thank you all for that. And then on just the last thing, the 8th period costs. When I took what is it? IB. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the name. The TOK. Yeah. There was no cost associated with that. It was just considered an 8th period class. So I don't see how that's different from taking another class like PE or something online as an 8th period. So I know there are costs associated with it, but I do want to have further discussion at some point on that. We continue to hear feedback not only on that but other online courses.
Mr. Moon,
Yes, Dr. Brewer.
may I say
Sure.
something, or have
Sure,
people
please.
gone around?
Please go
with
ahead.
this? So what I hear, the first 2 recommendations, it's almost unanimous for the board to go forward. You want to wait 2 more weeks to do it, but you want to just double check that the community consensus is there. For the PE one, I think we said no change, and I think I hear the board consensus saying continue to explore options. There's a few pieces there, the state, cost. Can you sort of create a 9th, some sort of hybrid online that is drivers, ed, and health? And then the whole definition, which I got to be honest, just listening, and I haven't even deep dived with them, the definition of what counts for athletics, varsity, JV, freshman, travel team. I mean, right. And that's not going to be something we can just flip out in 3 weeks. So that would be a continue to explore options. And then for foreign language, I'm just going to do what's the right word? I'm going to call an audible with you guys down there. Sloan, right now our recommendation was no, but continue to explore options. When we were going to bring, and maybe we don't know yet, another month, could we be bringing something about pairing elementary and middle and expanding pilots in other schools and have maybe another transition year before we go from one all the way to the other, and bring some more of the data back that people want to see?
Yeah,
And maybe the board might be willing to build a consensus on that versus flip the switch one whole way or the other. And I don't know, but since we have another work session coming up, I thought I'd just mention it.
Well, if you call an audible, I'm going to make the play and score a touchdown, just so you know, so don't worry about that. And I'll try not to use a lot of sports metaphors moving forward. I do think we can bring back some of that information in the November work session. I would say that I think I'm hearing the same thing that I think you're hearing from the board, and it's pretty much what we expected going into the work session, and that's why we organized it the way that we did. We thought there probably would be more consensus around science and social studies, and probably more questions and more work to do with respect to health, PE, and world languages. So we're happy to continue to work on those.
And I'd like to call a foul because I'd like the marching band to march across the field during the halftime game, and I would like the middle school arts teachers hold on this. This is not something that will not have an ill effect on them. So I call a foul, an audible foul, and say, let's talk about the arts programs and how this language program, you can bring back, you've decided what you're going to do, you're going to bring back a plan, but it can't be like, where all systems go, and then you don't even take into account how it can affect the arts programming in the schools, which is, and going back to just implementing this at 7th grade without taking into account anything like Dahlia schools, my schools, Karen's schools, very few of them have any kind of language programming in elementary schools. So that is the thing that has to be changed in order for things to move forward with equity.
Can I call an audible on the foul? Which is, I'm not saying that I would direct staff all
Don't get
systems.
sacked.
Not all systems go to the school board, but that we bring you at the next work session some more of that data so that you can come to consensus on what you would want to do with languages. And then that way you can have that deeper conversation that I think board members want before they're ready to go one way or the other.
Well, I heard I was in the minority. I mean, maybe there's two of us, but I think, I mean, there were only, with respect to the, allowing this to just the 7th grade to just move forward without.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
not sure. I think we wanted more information.
Right, but no, I think the majority of
So
people
yeah,
thought
so
it
what
was
could
a
happen
really
is
good
this,
idea.
as I see
where I
it,
was questioning it.
Based upon today's discussion, what I see is unanimity on social studies and science and 2-week delay. There may be some discussion on retroactivity of those, implementation of those two changes. On PE, probably we could, vote on this, giving, staff a guidance to a further, studying and see further advocacy on the state level. For the world languages, what I could see is at the first meeting in October, there could be a motion to postpone that for a time certain in maybe November or December timeframe, so that we could have one more chance of having more discussion with the data brought in and some other suggestion from the staff. That's how I am envisioning.
Can I get clarity on the 2 pilot programs will continue what they're doing? We're not stopping their programming. It's just looking to expand it.
Yeah, at this time, they've offered them and are carrying forward this year until waiting for additional information.
Okay?
And can I have clarity as to the schools that are offering a 7th grade offering to newcomers for credit for Spanish?
We can bring you those as the next step.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Evans.
I was going to ask if we have next steps. I did want to also capture the idea of pursuing AVID as a
Okay?
potential.
Okay, let's do next steps then. Could you enlarge the font? That's going the other direction. Okay. Okay. Number 2.
On number 3, it's request steering committee to consider allowing AVID to be used to fulfill either a fine arts / practical arts requirement, or, you can't hear me? Okay, I'll stop. To consider allowing AVID to fulfill either a fine arts / practical arts requirement or a CTE requirement.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarification? Is the steering committee still intact, or has it been disbanded?
That's a good question. I thought it was continuing.
They haven't met for 9 months, probably, I would say. I mean, we could always reconvene them. We hadn't necessarily considered that. I think with respect to maybe next step 4 that you have on there, I think that might be part of bringing back some additional information in the November work session.
So is that to say that the steering committee will be reconvened to consider these other things?
I mean, I don't know. I'd have to look at that and consider it. I haven't given it any consideration right now. It's something we could do. I wasn't necessarily intending to do that.
Okay, well, I guess, so what would be the alternative? If the steering, if the steering committee isn't going to be reconvened, then what would be the or?
I think it would depend on which next step we're talking about.
Well,
So-
3 and 4
Okay, so.
both have the steering committee referred to.
So 3 is really one that.
You want to say
might-
you or your staff, I mean, the steering committee or your staff?
Yeah, I mean,
Our staff, that would be fine.
yeah, number 3 is one that the instructional services staff would have to do. That would be something that we would work
Okay.
with VDOE on. And number 4 is something that we were already going to do as part of the November work session in terms of building out some options for the board with respect to world language expansion.
Okay, all right.
Is any next step missing? Okay, Mr. Schultz?
So it is determine a path forward on advocacy with the State Board of Education
On PE, you mean?
and any legislative package follow on.
Okay. On PE,
On health and PE.
health and PE.
I'm sorry, yes, HPE, yeah.
I think the board also mentioned trying to have the policy adjustments for science and social studies be retroactive.
Yes.
Yes.
Retroactive to what point? See,
That's what-
I want to, well, is it for seniors next year? I mean, is there any line, or is it just,
I think the only,
A
I mean,
free-for-all.
we need time to think about it, but one
'Cause-
bright line would be, if you're in the course now, you can't drop it, because there's no place else for you to
right,
go.
right. And the reason I'm asking about, is there any line, is it could have potential significant staffing implications. And so I don't want us to, at a whim, say, yeah, just make it retroactive without understanding what the impact is.
So let me suggest this, for the number 8, we can vote at the first meeting in October, whether we want to make it retroactive or we just want to make it prospective. All right, we can make those decisions at the board table.
I think it's incumbent upon staff to identify for us
Yeah.
whether or not what we want to vote on has implications that are not known at this point, because this is money and this is people, and
I think
that's
you can put it that
significant.
way, asking for implications for making the policy adjustment for science retroactive.
Prior to the
Prior to the
vote,
vote on October 11th.
prior to the
vote.
October 11th.
I
We
want
can
us
do
to
that.
be conscious
Yes.
of the potential. I mean, we may want to do this for kids, and it may sound like it's good, but the unintended consequences of something like this is a sweeping decision. I want to be careful.
Okay, with that, okay, hold on a second, I was gonna ask, who else says? Mrs. McLaughlin, okay. I don't want 30 pages, or why?
I actually was pretty concise with my questions and made them 4 points. But I don't see the one that I said that I would like to have staff review the costs associated with our online PE course. And just how do we make it more affordable for families, especially if it turns out that, it's just trying to fulfill the health.
Sure, I think we do have that information, budget information.
Well, we have the budget information. I'd like staff to review how we can make it more affordable and therefore accessible. And to Ms. Schultz's point, where she was, talking about these adjustments, I mean, I think it's fine to be able to look at what's retroactive and the impact, but I want everybody to still remember, I don't want to have next year's seniors be told they can't earn a standard diploma when the state said they did and we say they don't. So I don't want to stand in the way of that.
I agree. I concur that that's not what mine is intending to do.
Okay. Besides Ms. Darren Koufax, anybody else? Okay, Ms. Darren Koufax is the last one.
I guess maybe it can fall under 4. With that, because my concern that I've been bringing up is determine potential impacts on arts programming in middle school if high school language is added in 7th grade, if the high school program is added in 7th grade.
And Mr. Moon, on 4, the one that's most important there is the option for Spanish language native Spanish language students to be able to have a 7th grade option to get credit. As is offered elsewhere.
Ms. McLachlan, do we have your language, by the way? Was it number 9 we are missing? Oh, okay. Okay, well, now we do have everything. Anybody has any objection adopting all those 10 as a next step? I'm not hearing anything with that this meeting is adjourned. And you have a motion to go into closed meeting.
The board will now make a motion to go into closed meeting to discuss and consider personnel matters pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A1 of the Code of Virginia. Do I have a motion? Motion made.
Madam Chair, I'm a little worried that maybe some topics that we have been discussing in closed session could be discussed in open session, and I think in particular the topic that I've heard maybe be discussed, which is reorganization of some of the duties and responsibilities amongst the leadership team. I don't want that to be included in closed session if we can discuss it here at the table.
So may I suggest that we go into closed session and address what we need to for the majority of it and come back out and discuss in public that aspect?
Actually, I'd like to know the specific FOIA meetings, meeting law citation that this is a properly called closed meeting. Because there are very specific reasons under FOIA laws, extremely specific, and it in fact says that they are to be narrowly construed, that under all else, they're considered to be open and narrowly construed under state law for, and it lists very specific activities that are covered by closed. And it says, unless it is one of these and it is properly noticed and called under one of those, that it is considered to be open. And I do not understand from the flurry of conversations that have happened in the last 72 hours, I don't understand from my latest understanding of why this closed session is being called, that because it doesn't meet one of those things, I don't understand why we're going into closed session.
Madam Chair, I have a suggestion.
Yes,
which
please.
is only that, and Mr. Moon, maybe you can help. I think the way we probably should do this is go into closed and take those objections when we get into closed, and then if there are board members who don't think that we have followed the rules, when we come back out to vote on whether or not everything we discussed was on the closed agenda, they can vote no.
So Madam Chair, would you reread your motion?
The board will now make a motion to go into closed meeting to discuss and consider personnel matters pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A1 of the Code of Virginia.
I move.
Is there a second? Oh, it was,
the motion?
the motion
Okay.
was made and then by Mr. McElvain, seconded by Mr. Moon. All those in favor?
No, I'm sorry, can I have that citation again? I'm looking at it.
Okay, it's, well,
What happens if we're not unanimous on going into closed meeting?
We can go, it's a majority vote.
well, can I answer Ms. Schultz's question, which is 3711A1 of the Code of Virginia is what I cited. This is precisely the same site that we had this morning. And
That was different, that's covered, that's hiring. I want to read this for the record. Discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, and promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, and resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of a public body, and evaluation of performance of departments or schools or public institutions of higher education. It goes on from there. And it is not, is my understanding, we are not discussing hiring somebody, demoting somebody, changing somebody's
Chair.
salary, disciplining, resignation. So if we're not.
We are
We
discussing. We are discussing the terms of employment of an individual personnel. So I would suggest that the way I see it, that is covered under that language. I am not a lawyer. I apologize for not being a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. However, Mr. Foster will be down here in a moment, and he can also provide that interpretation. And I would suggest that we can go into close, start the conversation, and come back out if you believe we are.
What is the penalty if we come out and some of us have said that what we've talked about in closed session, we don't believe that we should have talked about in closed session? Then what? Oh, then we'll have done it.
Okay, let's keep order here.
fine.
Mrs. McLaughlin.
Yeah, I just have a process question based on kind of some of the advice that's happening here. I think the concern is simply this. Ms. Hines is saying you can just come out and say you voted no and we did violate it. I think that what I would be more comfortable with is we'll go in and under the belief that what's been listed to us is closed session protected. If legal counsel says to us, looking at the list of items, these don't qualify, then we can follow legal guidance. Because I think the concern, Ms. Hines and others, is we don't want to violate the law.
Precisely.
And come back and say.
But that is
"Oh, well,
exactly
we
what I,
violated."
that is exactly what I
As long as this is the first
suggested.
thing we discuss, as long as this is the first thing we discuss, is whether or not this is a properly noticed meeting, then I'm happy to go into closed session.
Or
Otherwise,
just,
I'm
I
not going
think
to
if
go in.
we'll get legal guidance to say if everything we're going to discuss is protected
and
or needs to
gentlemen.
come
Madam
out.
Chair,
I-
we
we have-
voted on this, and we go in, if anybody objection, there is a parliamentary procedure to follow.
Correct. Thank you.
Putting ourselves in peril.